I had always known that land was more than just soil, grass, and trees. For me, it was legacy. My grandfather had purchased that stretch of acres decades ago, working every ounce of his body to claim a piece of the world he could call his own. It wasn't just dirt, it was history, blood, sweat, and memories stitched together across generations. I grew up walking the borders of that land, learning its every curve, its every hidden corner. At the far end stood the old dam, built long ago as a way to control water flow from the nearby river. My grandfather used to tell me, "This dam protects the land. As long as it stands, this place will always be ours." Then, I never thought much about it, but soon I'd learned just how much power those words truly held. Years passed, and the quiet beauty of the land began to attract attention. A homeowners association had been expanding in the nearby neighborhood. Pastel houses and perfectly manicured lawns crept closer each year. At first, I ignored them. After all, I had no interest in living in one of their cookie-cutter boxes. But one morning I drove down the familiar dirt road and nearly slammed the brakes in disbelief. Where my open fields once stood, there were foundations. Not one, not two, but dozens. Workers were pouring concrete, framing walls, and laying bricks. 35 homes, all rising from my land. My chest tightened as I realized the HOA hadn't just inched closer. They had crossed over. They had stolen what was mine, and they were building an entire community on it, as if I didn't exist. When I tried to fight back, I was met with nothing but cold walls of bureaucracy. The county clerk couldn't find my grandfather's original records. The HOA claimed the land had been abandoned and unused for years, twisting my absence during college into a weapon against me. Lawyers laughed at me, saying it would take years and tens of thousands of dollars to fight it in court time I didn't have. Money I couldn't spare. It wasn't just a theft, it was an erasure. They were wiping away my family's story and replacing it with their white fences and HOA rulebooks. At night, I couldn't sleep, haunted by the image of strangers sipping coffee on porches that were never meant to be built. But there was one thing they didn't know. One thing they had overlooked. The dam, it stood silent, but strong, holding back the waters that had shaped this land for decades. The new homes had been built recklessly close to it, without permits, without proper inspections. They had taken shortcuts, convinced that nothing could stand in their way. As I stood by the dam one evening, staring at the rushing current behind it, I realized something. They thought they had one. They thought their signatures and bulldozers had buried me. But the water was patient. The water was powerful. And the water had always been mine. The idea first came to me as a whisper, dark, dangerous, but impossible to ignore. If the law wouldn't protect me, if the HOA could twist the system to their advantage, then perhaps it was time to let nature speak for me. I ran my hand along the dam's surface, feeling the vibrations of the water pressing against it. All it would take was one decision, one moment of resolve, and everything they had stolen would be swept away as if it had never existed. I wasn't ready to act yet, but I could feel the decision building inside me, like the rising waters behind the dam. They thought they had built a future here, thought they had erased me, but they were wrong, and soon they were going to find out just how wrong to be continued. Once the idea had taken root, it was impossible to shake. It lingered in every thought, every moment of quiet. The dam wasn't just concrete and stone, it was leverage, was justice waiting to be unleashed. But the weight of the decision pressed down on me just as heavily as the water pressed against the dam's wall. I couldn't simply act on impulse. To let the water go was to change everything, not only for the homes but for myself. Still, the more I watched the HOA strut across my land as if they owned it, the more the balance inside me tipped every week. Another house was completed. Bright siding, vinyl shutters, driveways lined with spotless cars. The sound of laughter and lawnmowers began to echo where silence used to live. They moved in quickly, without hesitation, without acknowledgement that they had stolen the ground they stood on. The HOA president, a smug, sharp-featured man, paraded through the neighborhood as though he were royalty. His rules were enforced immediately. No cars parked overnight on the street, no fences without approval, lawns to be cut exactly to regulation, and yet I was the ghost, rightful owner of the land erased. It burned inside me. My attempts at contacting them were dismissed as harassment. When I stood on the border of what was left of my property, watching them, they threatened to call the police. They laughed in my face when I shouted that the land was mine. I knew then there was no room for justice here, not in their courts, not in their books. The only justice left was the kind nature could deliver. I began to study the dam in a way I never had before, checked its foundations, the metal gates, the pressure points. It was old, yes, but well built. My grandfather had invested in strength. The release mechanism, though rusted, still functioned. If I wanted, I could let the waters spill freely, pouring into the low-lying areas where the HOA's houses now sat, but I couldn't act recklessly. I needed to understand exactly what would happen. At night, I returned with flashlights and notebooks, mapping out the land, studying elevations. The homes had been built directly in the flood zone. The HOA had ignored this fact in their arrogance, or they simply hadn't cared. They thought their paperwork would protect them from everything, but paperwork couldn't stop water. The first time I stood with my hand on the release lever, I felt the enormity of the choice. With one pull, I could erase all 35 homes. With one pull, the smug HOA president would watch his kingdom sink. With one pull, the land would be mine again, or at least no longer theirs. But I hesitated, because water doesn't discriminate. Once unleashed, it would claim everything in its path. It would be no going back. So I waited. I watched. I let the pressure build, both inside the dam and inside myself. Meanwhile, the HOA grew bolder. They began eyeing the rest of my land. The acres I still lived on. Notices appeared in my mailbox, thinly veiled threats about future development plans. They spoke as if my land was already theirs, as if I were simply an inconvenience to be removed. That was the final spark. One evening, as I stood at the dam, I watched storm clouds gathering in the distance. Heavy rain poured for hours, swelling the river, pressing harder against the dam. The water roared with fury, as if it too was tired of being contained. And in that moment, I realized I didn't need to fight the HOA. I only needed to stop holding nature back. The storm passed, but the pressure remained. I knew what I was going to do. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. I began preparing quietly, methodically. I cleared out my personal belongings from the areas nearest the flood zone. I reinforced my own property, ensuring I'd be safe. I told no one of my plan. This was between me, the land, and the water. As days passed, I felt a strange calm settle over me. They had stolen my legacy, mocked my rights, erased my history. But I held something they didn't understand: control over the one force they could never regulate, never fine, never own. And when the time came, they wouldn't be ready. Water was waiting, and so was I. The morning it happened, the air felt different. Heavy, electric, as if the land itself knew what was coming. I stood at the dam before sunrise, the sky painted in shades of gray and blue. The water churned violently behind the wall, swollen from weeks of storms. The sound was deafening, a constant roar that echoed in my chest. For months, I had carried the weight of their theft. For months, I had watched them live comfortably on ground that had been stolen from me. Ground my family had cherished for generations. Every house, every driveway, every fence was another insult carved into my legacy. But today, the land would remember me. I walked slowly to the release lever, my boots crunching on gravel slick with morning dew. My hand hovered over the rusted metal, trembling not with fear, but with anticipation. It struck me that this was not destruction, not in the truest sense. This was restoration. The HOA had chosen to build carelessly in the floodplain, ignoring warnings that had been carved into the very earth. I wasn't creating disaster. I was simply letting nature reclaim what was hers. I thought about my grandfather, about his words. This dam protects the land. As long as it stands, this place will always be ours. He had been right. But protection meant control, and control meant choice. and I was making mine. With one final breath, I pulled the lever. At first, nothing happened. Then came the groan of old metal shifting, the sharp clank of gears that hadn't moved in decades. And then the rush water exploded forward in a violent torrent. Crashing through the gates with the force of a beast finally freed from its cage, the dam shook beneath my feet as the flood surged into the valley, racing toward the neat rows of houses that had sprouted like weeds on my land. The sound was unlike anything I'd ever heard. A roar, a scream, a thunder that swallowed the world. I climbed to higher ground, watching as the flood spread, devouring everything in its path. The homes didn't stand a chance. Driveways disappeared under the first wave, cars floated like toys, porches splintered as water clawed through them. The pastel-painted walls crumbled, the carefully tended lawns vanished beneath brown, churning chaos. I could see them scrambling homeowners rushing out, shouting, waving their arms in panic. The HOA president stood in disbelief, his perfect community unraveling before his eyes. All the rules, all the arrogance, all the smug confidence that paper and bylaws could protect them, gone in an instant. It was over quickly. 35 homes, erased as if they had never been there. The land was raw again, scarred and soaked, but real. Wow, the silence that followed was haunting, broken only by the distant gurgle of retreating water. I felt no joy, no laughter, only a deep, quiet satisfaction it had taken from me, but the land had taken back. In the days that followed, chaos reigned. News crews arrived, helicopters circled, officials pointed fingers. They called it a tragedy, a natural disaster. They blamed faulty construction, poor planning, even the weather. But not one of them dared to speak the truth that the water had simply gone where it was always meant to go. And me, I said nothing. I watched from a distance as the HOA dissolved, its president humiliated, its members scattered. Silent once again, cleansed of their intrusion. When I walked the property weeks later, the air smelled of earth and renewal. The dam still stood, scarred but strong. My grandfather's legacy had endured. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. They had thought they could erase me. They had thought they could win. But the water had spoken, and the land was mine again.